So now I get to talk about what I found to be one of the most interesting parts of this whole class, which is party eras in American history. And what we mean is basically tracing the evolution of the parties. And particularly what we're going to look at is critical elections. These are elections where the coalitions that make up America change. And usually the dominant party in politics will switch, although there is one critical election where that doesn't happen. And so this is related to this is a party realignment. This is where the groups of voters that support a party begin to shift. And when I talk about specific examples, I think that's going to become very clear. And these usually revolve around new issues that have emerged into the American political system that the current party system just simply can't handle, and so it falls apart. The first party system in America is from 1796 to 1824. And this begins with the first party, the Federalists. Now, our founding fathers, many of them, particularly James Madison, warned of factions, or what we call today parties, groups of people who organized to control the government. The first party was created by Alexander Hamilton, and it's called the Federalist Party. And Washington and John Adams, for example, are Federalists. The Federalists tend to support the manufacturers, the businessmen, the merchants, the bankers. At this point, they tend to be located primarily in the Northeast. They tend to favor a strong central government. They tend to be allied politically with the British. Remember, we're a relatively insignificant country at the time, and so which of the major European powers we get behind is important. The Democratic Republicans will organize around Thomas Jefferson and James Madison to oppose the Federalists, and they will argue for strong state governments and a limited federal government. They'll tend to favor the French in foreign affairs. And of course, in 1800, they will take over. They will win with Jefferson in 1800, and again in 1804, 1808, 1812, 1816, 1820, until 1824. Now, the Federalist Party actually dies in 1816 when they turn against the War of 1812 and 1815 and begin cheering for America to lose. When we win, or at least claim we won the war, is really a tie. The Federalist Party will become disgraced and essentially cease to exist. In 1820, James Monroe runs unopposed, the only time in American history where we've had a presidential candidate run opposed. But by 1824, faction is back as John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson and Henry Crawford, for that matter, get involved in a tiebreaker in the presidential election, with John Quincy Adams forming a group of supporters that resemble the old Federalists and will evolve eventually into the Whigs, and Andrew Jackson taking the Democratic Republicans off and becoming the Democrats. Democrats of today, there's a straight line from Andrew Jackson straight to the Democrats of the modern times. The Whigs, who called themselves Whigs because they opposed Jackson, and they called him King Andrew. They said he acted like a dictator. And in England, the party that traditionally opposed the king called themselves the Whig parties. Now, Jackson found most of his support actually among Westerners, and the Whigs tended to support those on the East Coast, and one of the primary issues is going to evolve into westward expansion, which the Federalists didn't like either, for that matter. The Whigs and the Federalists are essentially the same people. Because Western voters voted for Democrats, and so the more we expanded west, the more votes Democrats would gain, and the Whigs tended to oppose that. The Democrats tended to favor small federal government with more power in the state governments, where Whigs supported the federal government paying for internal improvements, or spending federal government money to improve the infrastructure for business. The Whigs would come undone in the wake of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And what's really going on here is that the number one issue in the country is going to come to be slavery. But since there are pro-slavery Whigs and anti-slavery Whigs and pro-slavery Democrats and anti-slavery Democrats, neither party is willing to address the issue of slavery. And so we go to that long period in our history where it is the number one issue in the country. It's the country that people in the South and the North care most about. But the politicians will not even mention it. In fact, the Senate adopts a gag rule outlawing or banning discussion of slavery in the Senate at all. Can you imagine? The number one issue in the country is banned from discussion in Congress. So that's what's going on. Well, what happens when the parties do this is that the people are going to become dissatisfied with the parties. In this case, the Whig Party completely disappears. The Democratic Party evolves into the party that protects slavery, states' rights, they call it, in the South. And a new party will emerge. And that party will be the Republican Party, which is the Republican Party that is still with us today. This is a party that rises up in opposition to slavery. Basically, they're the remnants of the Federalists and the Whigs. And they tend to have the majority of their support in the North and the Northeast. They tend to have the support of the manufacturers, the merchants, the bankers, the people we had talked about earlier. There's actually going to be a critical election during this period which will not change the party in power. And what I mean by the party in power is the Democrats, for example, win the majority of elections from 1800 to 1856. From 1860 until really FDR in 1932, the Republicans are going to win the majority of elections. In 1896, the parties do reorganize, and the groups that support each party shift significantly. But the Republicans managed to remain in power. 1896, pretty complicated election. I may get into it in class, but I'm not going to talk about it here. It'll take all day.